In this world, ideas are cheap. Capital is what matters. Take the money and stop whining. Dominic flicked the check across the table like he was tipping a bad waitress. It landed right on top of my hand. $5,000. That was his price for stealing 2 years of my life. I looked at Sienna. She had copied every single page of my restaurant designs, my floor plans, my lighting concepts, and my soul. Now she was sitting there smirking, waiting for me to explode. She looked at me like I was a beggar she was paying to go away. I turned to my husband. Jason? Are you hearing this? He would not even look at me. He just stared at his dinner plate and whispered for me to just take it. He begged me not to make a scene. That silence hurt more than the theft. My own husband was siding with the money, not his wife. I looked at the check again. Then I looked at Dominic. I did not scream. I did not throw wine in his face. I picked up the check, folded it neatly, and put it in my purse. You are right, I said, my voice dead calm. Capital is what matters. They thought I was surrendering. They had no idea I was just getting started. To understand why I kept my composure, you have to understand exactly what they stole. It was not just a business plan. It was 730 days of my life. I am an architect by trade. But the muse was supposed to be my masterpiece. I spent months sitting in an empty warehouse, measuring exactly how the 5 o'clock sunlight hit the brickwork so I could position the tables perfectly. I sourced vintage velvet from a supplier in Belgium that took me 6 weeks to find. I designed the acoustics so that you could hear the music, but still whisper to the person next to you and be heard. It was precise, it was personal, and it was stored on my iPad, which I foolishly left unlocked around my sister-in-law. Sienna. That is a name that tastes like saccharin and old pennies. For years I thought she was just annoying. I did not realize she was dangerous. You see, Sienna is what I call an identity vampire. She does not just want your things, she wants your essence. She has all the money in the world, thanks to Dominic. But she has no taste, no vision, and no soul of her own. When she looks in the mirror, I think she sees a blur. So, she has to steal other people's skin to feel real. She copied my haircut. She bought the exact same perfume. And when she saw my designs for the muse, she did not just see a restaurant. She saw a personality she could buy. She took photos of every single sketch. And because Dominic has the capital, they hired my exact contractors and broke ground 3 months before I could get my loan approved. They named it the Siren, because of course they did. But the knife in my back was not from Sienna. It was from Jason. When I found out they had stolen my location and my design, I ran to my husband, shaking, expecting him to be furious. He did not look surprised. He looked tired. He admitted he had known for weeks. Dominic had told him over golf. Jason had watched me stay up late refining drawings for a project he knew was already dead. And he said nothing. He told me he kept quiet to keep the peace. That was the moment the marriage actually ended. Right there in our kitchen. I realized I was not his partner. I was just collateral damage in his family dynamic. So, sitting at that dinner table, staring at that $5,000 check, I stopped crying. I realized that if I acted like a victim, they would crush me. But if I acted like an architect, I could build a trap they would never see coming. The best way to destroy a copycat is not to hide your ideas. It is to feed them a poison apple and watch them choke on it. I knew Sienna had the money to buy anything, but she possessed the insecurity of someone who knows they are a fraud. She did not trust her own eyes. She only trusted the crowd. So, I decided to become the crowd. I spent $100 on a simple bot farm and created Klaus V, a reclusive, avant-garde designer from Berlin who did not exist. I built his digital portfolio in 3 hours using artificial intelligence. His aesthetic was not just ugly. It was hostile. I called it toxic industrial. Think cracked concrete, hazard orange paint, rusted metal chairs that looked like tetanus risks, and lighting so clinical it felt like an interrogation room. It was garbage masquerading as genius. Then, I unleashed the bots. I targeted Sienna's social media feed with surgical precision. 50 accounts with names like Lady Montag and Baron Von H started commenting on my fake trend posts. They wrote things claiming that finally, there was a design for the intellectual elite, and that only basic people want comfort, while true art demands suffering. Sienna bit the hook so hard she swallowed the line. I watched it happen in real time. She started reposting the manifestos from Klaus V, adding her own captions about challenging the narrative. It was the classic Emperor's New Clothes scenario. She looked at a pile of rust and saw a crown because she was terrified that if she did not see it, she would be exposed as the ordinary, talentless person she actually was. 2 days later, the stop work order came down at the construction site. Sienna fired the Finnish carpenters, the ones installing the beautiful walnut paneling I had originally designed, and ordered Dominic to write a check for $50,000 to import authentic, rusted corrugated steel from a junkyard in Detroit. She was not just destroying my original vision. She was paying a premium to replace it with a disaster. She thought she was being a visionary. I knew she was building her own tomb, one sheet of rusted metal at a time. I did not steal the evidence that destroyed Sienna. I earned it. You see, people like my sister-in-law treat service workers like furniture. Necessary, but silent. That was her fatal mistake. I knew the head contractor, a man named Mike, from my previous projects. He was a craftsman who took pride in his work. And Sienna was forcing him to build a monstrosity while screaming at him about deadlines she had set arbitrarily. I visited the site 3 days before the opening. It was worse than I had imagined. It did not just look bad. It felt hostile. The custom steel chairs Sienna had ordered were jagged and freezing cold to the touch. The strobe lights she insisted on installing triggered a migraine within 30 seconds. It was a sensory assault. I found Mike in the back office, staring at a pile of unpaid invoices. He looked defeated. When he saw me, he did not ask what I was doing there. He just shook his head and said that she was ruining it, and refusing to sign the checks for the overtime. I looked at him and told him that I knew. But I needed him to trust me. I told him to keep building exactly what she asked for, and not to fix a single thing. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. He told me he had recorded their meeting yesterday, just so he would have proof when she inevitably refused to pay him. He pressed play. Sienna's voice pierced the air, shrill and cruel. She screamed that she did not care if it was uncomfortable. She told him to make it look disgusting. She wanted it to be so aggressive that when Elara walked in, she would feel like trash. She told him to just spend the money and shut up. It was perfect. She had admitted that the entire design was not art. It was a weapon targeted specifically at me. I looked at Mike and made him a promise. I told him to send that file to me, and I promised him that when the dust settled, he would get every single penny he was owed. He sent the file. I walked out of that construction site with the kill shot in my pocket. Sienna thought she was building a restaurant. She did not realize she had just handed me the detonator. Opening night at the Siren was less of a celebration and more of a hostage situation. I stood on the mezzanine level, wearing a simple black dress, watching the city's elite try to navigate the obstacle course Sienna had built. It was a disaster in slow motion. The toxic industrial theme was not just an aesthetic choice. It was a physical assault. I watched a socialite in a $5,000 silk gown snag her hem on one of the rusted steel chairs. She tried to smile, but I could see the sheer panic in her eyes as she realized she was ruining her outfit just by sitting down. The lighting was even worse. The strobe effects, which Sienna insisted were kinetic energy, were inducing migraines in real time. Guests were squinting, holding their temples, and desperately trying to find a shadow to hide in. The air conditioning was set to a freezing 60 degrees, because the manifesto from Klaus V claimed that cold preserves the mind. People were shivering in their couture. Then, Sienna took the stage. She looked manic, holding a microphone like it was a scepter. She tapped it twice, sending a screech of feedback through the room that made everyone wince. She shouted a welcome to the visionaries, her voice echoing too loudly off the bare concrete walls. She claimed that what we saw was not just a restaurant, but a revolution. She said the concept came to her in a dream, challenging comfort to awaken souls. She claimed every rusted bolt and flicker of light was her personal design choice. While she rambled on about her genius, my phone buzzed in my clutch. It was a text from Mike, the head contractor. It read, "Service door unlocked. Good luck." I slipped away from the railing and walked calmly down the back hallway. The security guard was busy trying to fix a leaking pipe that was dripping artistic sludge onto a waiter, so I walked right past him. I pushed open the heavy steel door to the server room. Inside, the hum of the cooling fans was the only sound. I did not need to hack anything complex. I just needed to switch the input source. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket, the one containing my original 3-dimensional renders and Mike's audio recording, and plugged it into the main console. On stage, Sienna was reaching her crescendo. She cried that she poured her heart into this, and wanted to create something honest. I hit enter. The strobe lights instantly cut out. The room plunged into total darkness for 3 seconds. The silence was absolute. Then, the massive 200-inch LED screen behind Sienna roared to life. It was not the abstract art she had programmed. It was a split-screen image. On the left was my original render of the muse, warm, inviting, golden. On the right was a photo of the current siren, cold, ugly, and rusted. The caption in bold red letters read, "The original versus the cheap copy." Sienna froze. She turned around, her mouth dropping open. Before she could speak, her own voice boomed through the high-fidelity sound system, clearer than it had ever been in real life. "Make it look disgusting, I don't care. As long as it looks expensive enough to make Elara feel like trash. Just spend the money and shut up. The recording looped. Make Elara feel like trash. The reaction was not anger, it was laughter. Brutal, high society laughter. It started with a chuckle from the back, and swept through the room like wildfire. Sienna stood there, shrinking under the weight of her own cruelty broadcast at maximum volume. She looked at Dominic, begging for help. But he was staring at the screen, pale as a ghost. Then, gravity delivered the final blow. One of the heavy, industrial light fixtures, installed hastily and without proper bracing per Sienna's rush order, swung loose from the ceiling. It crashed onto the VIP table below, shattering crystal and sending glass flying. Screams replaced the laughter. People scrambled for the exits, live streaming the chaos as they ran. I watched Dominic's face change from embarrassment to sheer terror. He was not looking at Sienna anymore. He was looking at the lawsuit that had just crashed onto table 4. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Dominic was not an arrogant investor anymore. He was a desperate man trying to outrun a class action lawsuit. The toxic industrial design had not just failed, it had physically injured 3 VIP guests. His lawyers were screaming at him to liquidate the asset before the liability claims attached to his main real estate portfolio. That was when my proxy made the call. A generic limited liability company offered to take the lease, the fixtures, and most importantly, the full legal liability off his hands for $25,000 in cash. Dominic did not even read the fine print. He saw a life raft and signed the papers immediately, thinking he was dumping a radioactive disaster on some unsuspecting idiot. An hour later, I walked through the front doors of the Siren. Dominic and Sienna were there, hurriedly packing up their personal items, trying to flee the scene of the crime. When they saw me, Sienna sneered, asking if I was there to gloat, and telling me to leave because the place was a hazard. Actually, I said, pulling the fresh deed from my bag and placing it on the bar. I own it. Their faces went blank. I did not wait for them to process it. I turned to Mike, the head contractor, who was standing by the wall, with a crowbar, waiting for my signal. I handed him a cashier's check for $12,000, every cent of the back wages Sienna had stolen from him, paid out of my own savings. I told Mike to tear it all down, pointing to the hideous rusted metal panels covering the walls. Mike grinned. He jammed the crowbar behind a panel and ripped it free with a satisfying screech. Behind the toxic facade was the pristine, high-end, soundproofing and electrical work that Dominic had paid $200,000 to install. The garbage was just skin deep. The bones of the restaurant were perfect, and I had just bought them for pennies on the dollar. Jason ran in a moment later, breathless and sweating. He looked at me, then at the deed, and I saw the gears turning in his head. He realized I was not the victim anymore. I was the winner. He started walking toward me, putting on his nice guy face. He told me he was proud of me, and that we could fix this and run it together. I did not even blink. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. I pressed it against his chest. It was not a business plan. It was divorce papers. You backed the money, Jason, I said, stepping past him. I backed the talent. I won. It has been exactly 8 months since I bought the Siren for $25,000. I renamed it the Muse 48 hours later. Today, if you walk in, you will not see any rusted metal or hazard orange paint. You will see the warm golden light I originally designed 2 years ago. You will see velvet banquettes filled with people laughing, eating, and actually enjoying themselves. The place is fully booked for the next 6 weeks. The financial justice was absolute. My forensic accountant ran the numbers last week. Dominic spent $240,000 on the renovation, the high-end kitchen equipment, and the structural upgrades. I bought it all for 10 cents on the dollar. Essentially, my brother-in-law financed my entire business startup costs as a donation, simply because he was too terrified of a lawsuit to read a contract properly. As for Sienna, her reputation did not just take a hit, it evaporated. In the high society circles she cares so much about, being cruel is forgivable, but being a laughingstock is a death sentence. The video of her bragging about high art while a light fixture crashed into a table has over 3 million views. She moved to a different state 2 months ago, but the silence is the most expensive thing I won. 3 weeks ago, on my 30th birthday, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Jason. It was heavy, handwritten on expensive stationery, probably 5 pages long. I stood by my mailbox, feeling the weight of it in my hand. I knew exactly what it said without opening it. It would be a masterpiece of manipulation. He would talk about how much he missed me, how he was just caught in the middle, how family is complicated, and how he was willing to forgive me for the divorce if I was willing to start over. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I felt nothing. It was the indifference of a stranger. I walked over to the recycling bin and dropped the letter inside, unopened. I did not need to read his version of history because I am too busy writing my own future. I walked back into my restaurant and saw Mike, my head contractor. He was sitting at the bar having a coffee before his shift. We are partners now. I gave him a small equity stake in the Muse because he stood by me when it mattered. He waved at me, a genuine smile on his face. And I realized that this is what family actually looks like. It is not shared DNA or a marriage license. It is the people who hand you the weapon when you are unarmed. It is the people who help you strip the toxic wallpaper off the walls to find the gold underneath. Looking back at the wreckage of my marriage and the success of my business, I have realized that this was not just a story about a stolen restaurant. It was a masterclass in human nature. And if you are listening to this, feeling like you are the one being erased or copied, I want you to write down these 3 rules. They are the price I paid for my freedom, so you might as well get them for free. Rule number 1 is about the difference between cost and value. Dominic and Sienna thought that because they spent money, they created value. They did not. They just created expensive garbage. Money can buy you the Italian marble, the imported steel, and the prime location. But it cannot buy the vibe. It cannot buy the soul of a place. That comes from the creator. Never be afraid of a copycat with a bigger budget. They can trace your lines, but they cannot replicate your hand. They are building a body without a heartbeat. And the world will always smell the rot eventually. Rule number 2 is what I call the asset seizure protocol. When someone hurts you, the instinct is to burn their house down. We want to scream, destroy, and shatter. But destruction is a waste of energy. The smartest revenge is not to destroy your enemy. It is to acquire their resources. Dominic paid for my plumbing. He paid for my electrical grid. He paid for my HVAC system. Instead of destroying the siren, I let him build it, and then I legally took it. Do not just get even. Get ahead. Take the pain they caused you and convert it into equity. Use their doubts as fuel and their mistakes as your foundation. Rule number 3 is the hardest one to accept. It is the zero tolerance policy for enablers. For a long time, I blamed Sienna for being the villain. But the true villain of my story was Jason. The person who holds the knife is dangerous, yes. But the person who watches them stab you and tells you to please be quiet because you are making a scene is lethal. Jason wanted peace more than he wanted justice. He wanted to be comfortable more than he wanted me to be safe. You have to learn to cut these people off. Not partially, not temporarily, completely. Loyalty is the only currency that matters in a relationship. If they are bankrupt in loyalty, you need to close the account. I am Elara. I am 30 years old. I am divorced. And I am the sole owner of the most successful lounge in the city. They tried to steal my dream, so I stole their reality. Now, I have a question for you. What is the one idea, the one dream, or the one boundary that you have been letting people trample on because you are afraid of the conflict? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you are going to take back.